other. One of them was in Italy, and one of them was in Spain. And one of the generals like told her that the one in Spain, the one in Italy told her that the one in Spain wanted to overthrow her and become emperor, and she like believed him. So she had him assassinated. So then the one in Italy went and tried to fight the Vandals, and then got his ass kicked. And there was no like good emperor left in Spain because he had been murdered. And so it was kind of like Rome was kind of losing all of the talent from the inside up until that point. And so yeah, they lost from the Vandals. And then the Vandals came in and actually deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last official Roman emperor, and and wasn't a usurper. It wasn't like I'm the new emperor of Rome. It was like, okay, we're done with Rome, no more Rome. And because before that, there had been lots of like German usurpers. There was one guy called like Maximinius, who was supposed to be like 8 feet tall. He was a usurper. Now I'm the Roman emperor. And then no, now I'm the Roman emperor, right? Because the Roman emperor, but now the Roman Empire is gone. It's like the company has gone bust. And now it's just get a new company in there. So yeah, now it's just a whole bunch of different kingdoms. You got the Lombards in northern Europe, northern Italy, Visigoths in Spain. And so here's like where the fall of Rome is. And I guess when they did that, they didn't, there wasn't so much solidarity culturally, so they couldn't communicate, and that's kind of when the Dark Ages came. They didn't, they, they didn't have the same values to make the aqueducts and stuff. But I don't really know the details of that. I mean, maybe the Dark Ages came just mainly because like it was just the Dark Ages for Italy, because they weren't as filthy rich making money off everybody else. But it wasn't really the Dark Ages so much for like the outer edges of the empire. Maybe it was just the same or even better. That's what I believe. But definitely the Dark Ages for Italy, and especially after the year 537. In the year 537, I guess there were still some Vandals up there in north and pissed off at Rome, or jealous of the Romans or something. But they went in and they dismantled a bunch of the aqueducts that fed Rome, right? So within the course of like a year, I don't know exactly how long it took, but it probably wasn't very long at all. There was a mass exodus out of Rome. Rome went, in the year 537, to 1.2 million people down to 12,000 people. Because there was literally no more water coming into Rome. They dismantled the aqueducts. But there's still one fountain that still works from the aqueducts. It's the one right down there in the center, just east of the Colosseum, that still works. But yeah, that was the fall of Rome as a city. You could give different dates to the fall of Rome. The official fall of Rome was 476 when Romulus Augustus was deposed. But the fall of Rome as a city happened in 410 when they were sacked. And then the fall of like the empire, you could say maybe with the reign of Commodus, because he fucked everything up, and then they started losing territory and having problems. But the fall of Rome as a city, like the real fall of Rome as a city itself, was in 537 when they dismantled the aqueducts and went from 1.2 million down to 12,000. Then that's when it emptied out. That's when the Colosseum stopped being in use and started being used for building materials. I'm going to build my castle. Well, get stones from the Colosseum. Rome's a ghost town. 537. Dismantling aqueducts to build houses, and it's just like Rome died, in 537. And then, and that was the Dark Ages. But then Byzantium was doing well all the way up until the year 1454 when they got sacked by the Ottomans. Byzantium was actually they were doing well. The Byzantium, they were the richest people. They lived really well. But they followed the business plan of the Romans, which really was a little bit autocratical. They had this one guy called Justinian, and he took over. He tried to recreate the Roman Empire. And I think he did there for a little bit, but then when he died, the empire was taken over by the Vandals, by all those other barbarians again, and he was a total tyrant. He was like a really unpopular guy because he taxed people too much. And one day they were at the Colosseum, the Circus Maximus there in Constantinople, and everybody was like, depose Justinian, depose Justinian. They also maybe didn't like him because his wife, Theodora, was an ex-burlesque dancer. And who he married and made her co-king. Like, just as powerful as he. And they were going to depose him, but she was like, no way, man, I don't want to run. Stay here. So he was like, okay, let's call a meeting to have all of the people, all of the rebels meet with me in the forum, in the Colosseum area, and then I'll like just discuss terms. So they all 30,000 of them went in there, and then he just took his army, locked him in, and then like killed them all. And that was like how he dealt with that, and he got to keep his power after that. But and then justice comes from him. I don't know how that happened, but anyways, after him, there was another guy called Basil, and there was this new kingdom that popped up called the Bulgarian Kingdom in Bulgaria. I don't know who they originally were. I'll find that out one day. But he was a really good military commander, and he knocked those Bulgarians down back, even though they were really close to Rome. And he was called Basil the Bulgar Slayer because he killed a bunch of these Bulgarians. And then he had the captives, like the thousands of captives he took. He blinded 99 out of 100 of them, and then he left the last guy, and he blinded one of his eyes. So there was like one guy leading one guy with one eye leading 199 blind dudes back to Bulgaria. And so they had to take care of them, and I guess they couldn't fight them for another generation after that. But anyways, they kind of started losing territory because there was another, because I think most of their territory was actually in like Turkey. But they were losing their territory, I guess, to the Greeks and stuff, but to like the Ottomans. The Ottoman was a new empire, kind of a new business that came on, had a new idea of things. They were originally, Mongols. Well, they're called Turks. There's different ethnic groups around the world. You have the Slavs, which are like Eastern Europeans. They're the ones with like the round heads, kind of look like Vladimir Putin. Then you have like the Germans, who are like Scandinavians and Germans, who are pretty much similar to like the Britons, I think, even though the Britons can't speak their own language. Maybe the Britons are a little bit, I don't know, darker skinned, I don't know, darker hair. But then you have the Mongols, who are like Chinese-looking people on northern China. And then you have the Turks, who are kind of like the eastern side of the Mongols, so similar. I don't know really what they're kind of like Asian-looking, And so then like the Turks, and then there's Chinese, but so the Turks and the Mongols kind of team up. They're these big nomadic tribes and sometimes take over. And so they came over, let's see, back in the year, I don't know exactly, but like 600 or something like that. They came over and took over like the Middle East, Western Asia, and started their own like kingdom. There's this guy called Osman who came in, and they became Muslims. In the year 630, I think, is when Muhammad was born. He lived for like 50 years, 80, 70 years or something. And he was born in like Saudi Arabia, like Medina, Saudi Arabia, or Mecca, Saudi Arabia, and then he like lived in Medina. But he was this like cattle trader, and he knew those people back then. They knew a lot about the Old Testament. It was the Middle East, the same area. I don't know how literate they were. They say that I don't think Muhammad was literate, but a lot of people around there were. But they were basically like, they're like kind of nomadic type people, but who had a lot of culture and stuff. And so he had like visions from God, and he was like instructed to make and change the world. And so he did the same thing that I guess monotheists did. He's like, get rid of all of your different trinkets and toys and trinkets. Don't pray to them. There's one God for everybody, one God, and then we all get along. So they did that, and they became the Muslims, and that ended up working wonders. The whole idea of one God, monotheism, one God for everybody. It's not your God and my God, and then we fight over. Because they had lots of stupid fights. It just causes reasons to have stupid fights when you have lots of different gods. Because they'd have like one place where it was like where you put the God to watch over us, right? Like the highest hill of the village you're in. So then they'd fight over who gets to put the God there, and like what God is higher than the other God. Because if my God's higher than your God on the hill, then he's going to have more power, and then your people are going to have more power to me. But if it's like if we all have the same God and we're all the same religion and the same people, then we don't have to worry about that. It's like, okay, your God's up there, but your God is my God too, so okay, we're good, And that's actually an argument that he settled, because he was originally he was a really smart guy, a good trader, and then he was known as a really just guy, and then a really compassionate guy, and then he was a really smart guy, and then he came up with this idea, and it seemed to work for everybody, so then they all became Muslim. And that's actually how the Muslim Empire came. The Muslim Empire was the most advanced. The Islamic Empire was the most advanced society from the year, basically from after Muhammad, 600 AD, until the fall of the Islamic Empire, which was like, I don't know, maybe 1492 is when they were kicked out of Spain. But until Genghis Khan, which was the year like 12, until like the 1200s. So for like 600 years there, the Muslims were the most advanced people in the world, and they were right on the verge of getting to the Renaissance, and giving an industrial revolution to everybody. And they actually did contribute to creating the industrial revolution to the Europeans, but the Europeans did it because they had some unfortunate things happen to them. Yeah, but they had the Islamic Empire, which stretched from the edges of India all the way to Spain, and all of northern Africa, all of Anatolia. I mean, all of Turkey. It was just huge. It was like 3 times bigger than the Roman Empire, and their capital was in Baghdad, which was created by one of those guys to be specifically the Islamic. And see, they did well because they all cooperated with each other because they all had their same God, and they were all identified as one unit of people, and so they trusted each other. So they would have they invented the system of credit. So I'm going to send you 100 cows, or I'm going to send you like 100 boatloads of silk, 2,000 miles, and you'll just give me an IOU, So they did it, and then he would pay him later because they're a Muslim and they believed in the same God and they cooperated, and it was Allah. And so that's when they had that's when another one of these guys popped up. I don't remember who it was, but a scientist dude discovered the world was round, found out exactly how big it was. They were doing eye surgery, cataracts, because what they did is they dug up all of the books from Greece, and they rediscovered all the stuff that the Greeks had discovered back in the day, and then learned that and then improved on it. And so they're really learned people. They had the Arabic numerals, which we have adopted now. So they're really excelled in math and astronomy and this kind of thing. What else other inventions did they have? They have lots of inventions. I mean, those political ideas. They had a caliphate, which was basically a republic. So they had elected officials. They didn't have like a king who was all powerful. It was more of the Islamic Empire was kind of like a coalition of states. It's kind of like the Holy Roman Empire, sort of like a coalition of capitals. That was in Baghdad, and they moved it to Damascus, and in Syria, and then they moved from Damascus to Cordoba in Spain, and I mean, they had it was kind of like the Roman Empire with the Byzantinians on the east and the Rome on the west. It was like this big unit of people, and so they kind of, and like the Ottoman Empire was kind of part of that because they were all Muslim. And then the Ottomans grew and grew and grew, and then it was but then after that, the Ottomans became animosious, developed some animosity with the with the Persian Empire of the time. I don't remember what the dynasty was called, but and they're doing great. Only some bad things happened, which kind of screwed them up and have them screwed up until today. The main bad thing that happened with them was Genghis Khan. The Mongols came and Genghis Khan was born in 1206 and died in 1290. So in the 12s was when the Mongols, and then the 13s and onward up until the 15s or something, the Mongols destroyed everything. Especially they destroyed the Islamic Empire, and what happened was Genghis Khan. See, there's all these Mongols up in Mongolia, and that whole area, which is huge, Russia, which was just these huge fields of grass with horses everywhere. So each one of these guys had 6 horses, and they had all this place to graze their horses, and they'd ride their horses all day long, and that's what they did. They rode horses all day long, and they would hunt like deers and stuff. but they were basically the greatest war machine that ever lived, because they had this like, probably had a big Burgonian population explosion again, but they they had they had a unification under Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan was basically like this man on a mission. He was like the chosen one for the Mongols. He was this like really aggressive kid. He was a little kid, and some guy was like, hey, like his dad was a chief, and his dad was like betrayed and murdered by another chief, and so his mother and he was like ostracized by his family, I guess, because they didn't want to harbor him to piss anybody off, so that they would get killed, because if he survived, and he would like try to lay claim to the throne and get revenge and all that stuff. So but they didn't kill him, and then he kind of survived like a rat for a while. And anyway, I guess he met some older guy who was like, hey, little kid, like, get out of my way or something. He's like, don't piss me off, or I will wreak vengeance on you and kill you one day. And the guy was like, damn, this kid's got some chutzpah. You've got chutzpah, kid. I'm not going to kill you. Anyways, he got in his head that he was like a freaking ultimate warrior. So and he was a really good military strategian. So he got a bunch of people to follow him. And he had like a blood brother who he grew up with when he was a kid, who ended up, was a leader too, maybe a tribal chieftain. Anyway, they had a civil war. And he beat his blood brother's war. His blood brother had to like get on his knees and like say sorry. I don't know what he did with him. I think he just kind of like banished him and like sent him off. I don't think he hurt him though. But then he was basically like the guy who unified China. He just took these guys, killed these guys, and then unified everything. He did the same thing with the Mongols. He killed all the tribes until all the tribes were unified under him. And then they kind of got excited about that, maybe because they were sick of having wars with each other all the time. And then he was like, all right, well, we're going to take over the whole world now. And they were like, yay, the Mongols are going to take over the whole world. And they got excited about being Mongolians. And so they did. They took over the whole world. They went all the way down to Vietnam. I think they took over Vietnam, or at least they tried to take over Vietnam. They took over freaking China. And they installed their own, they controlled all of China for 100 years under a dynasty called the Yuan dynasty. They never even learned how to read. It was just these crazy Mongolians. And I think they were the ones who made the great city in Beijing. They tried to like make a replica of like their big tent city that they had in the steppe. And then like for 100 years, the Chinese emperor like lived in a tent. It was like the Mongols in control of all the Chinese. And then they had like the smart Chinese, literate Chinese people do all the administration and the taxes and stuff. And then the Mongolian dude but he was actually, like Genghis Khan's grandson, the one who, like the great Khan leader of the Yuan dynasty was called Kublai Khan. And he was actually a pretty good, a good leader, He I guess, maybe those Mongolians, they felt a little bit, they had like the Napoleon complex. They felt a little bit like they were looked down upon as Mongolians, and they were pissed off about that. But once they came in, they liked having the luxury and stuff. But they still had a special place in their heart for like poor farmers. So he did a lot for the poor farmers, for the poor people. He made laws protecting them. He invented grain holding sites to store grain in case there was a famine. They would give it out to the starving farmers, and different like rights protecting farmers and stuff. And he was a patron of the arts and stuff. He tried to attack Japan, but there were storms, and he lost like 160 boats or something trying to attack Japan one time, just because they get sunk in a ocean. And they never went back. His Chinese people were like, don't do it. So they never went back to Japan. So he was like, because he wanted to be the Mongolian. But they also, the Mongols, I think, had like a brotherly connection to the Chinese. The Chinese looked like the Mongolians. They were familiar with the Chinese. They did not treat the Islamics the same way. And that was the downfall of the Islamics. They went and they took over. I don't know. It was the Persians of the time of the Islamic Empire. They snuffed out the Ottoman Empire like in the late, not the Ottoman, but the Islamic Empire like in the late 1100s. They just killed their armies. I don't know how many armies. I don't know if they were outnumbered. I don't know the details of that battle, but they wiped out the Islamic. And the problem is when they went into the city to Baghdad, this is like the golden age of the Islamic Empire. They had these great libraries. They had these, all these scientists inventing all these things, figuring out the world's round, and they did some great things. I'll come back to the Mongols after, but the Islamic Empire did some great things for Europe. The Europeans came in the Crusades. I missed the Crusades and the Viking Age, so let's go to the Crusades and the Viking Age, and then we'll go back to the Mongolians attacking the Islamic Empire. Okay. It was the Vikings, and then it was the Crusades. Now, first the Vikings came down in the year 790. This is the Dark Ages of Europe. It's feudalism, so there's no really cohesion. There's like people fighting these people to gain control of this valley, and then you'd fight back to gain control of the valley again. But if there was like invaders coming in, they couldn't create these huge armies like the way that Rome could make, these armies of thousands and thousands of people that would meet you in battle and snuff you out. So there was basically another one of these population explosions in Scandinavia, in Norway and Denmark, and the Vikings, they came down in these Viking boats, which are these like beautiful ships with these really flat bottoms, and they could like go across the ocean, and they could also go up rivers because they had a really shallow draft. And that is when Leif Erikson, I think in like the year 800, there was a Danish guy who discovered Iceland in like the year 800, and they started the Kingdom of Iceland. And Leif Erikson discovered Greenland and created a settlement, and even some say created tribes in the Native Americans. I think some settlers say when they went to America, they saw like white people, white Indians, who could speak like Gaelic and stuff, But anyways, Glenn Kimball says when Lewis and Clark went across America, they brought Gaelic-speaking translators because so many Indians spoke Gaelic. But whatever, I don't know if that's true. But yeah, the Vikings in the year 790, they went and they raided some monastery in northern Ireland called Lindisfarne. And that was easy pickings for them because they could just run in with these huge axes and just like hack people apart. And I guess they had no remorse. They were total barbarians. I think his idea, the guy, at least the Viking who started York, because the Vikings pretty much took over England and France. Not all of it, but like half of it. But they basically took it over because they were like a people. And before that, all the Brits and stuff were like were kind of like just different kingdoms, And so the Vikings came in, and they were just taking kingdom after kingdom after kingdom, and they couldn't. The Romans couldn't, or the Brits couldn't take over, couldn't protect themselves as much. And there was one guy called. There was one Rome. I think it was Essex. One king called Alfred the Great, and he put together a bunch of good warriors who actually were first people successfully fought off the Vikings. Vikings had a different way of fighting. They had like that age-old, individual fighters, going out and just hacking, and they had these big axes with this big momentum, with the axe head, and just slice you. And it's a great offensive one-on-one weapon, better than a sword because a sword doesn't have the momentum. Swords are better for if you're in a group of people and you just stab them and then you run off, or if you're like a skilled warrior, with a sword and a shield. But but anyway, Alfred the Great beat the Vikings in one battle, even though they had this one Viking on a bridge who like hacked away a bunch. He just kept hacking away and killing the Brits until one Brit went under the bridge and stuck him from behind and killed him from a hole in the bridge. But so he was the savior of England, and that he was the inspiration of King Arthur. King Arthur is just a story that somebody made up, and nobody even knows who wrote the King Arthur story. But the inspiration for him was Alfred the Great, because he was the one who saved Roman Britain, Roman-inspired Britain. Because after Rome left in the year 410, the year that Rome was sacked, and they had to bring all of the troops back, the legions back from Britain to protect Italy. That was the end of Rome. Rome left in England, and then they were like, okay, well, we like your culture, so they kept the culture that they liked, but they kind of became independent again. So yeah, they had like Roman swords, they had Roman armor similar to it. They had the banner, they had palaces and mosaics and all that stuff, and baths probably. And they had, their culture, but they were broken up into different kingdoms and stuff. And then the Vikings came in and won all these battles, and basically started new kingdoms. They started the kingdom of York. They started the kingdom, I think, of Northumbria. And they basically, it was, and there was one guy called something who was having problems with civil war problems with another guy. I don't know the exact details, but he invited 3 boatloads of Vikings over to protect him. But when they protected him, he didn't want to pay him, so they just they cooed him. They took over his kingdom and moved into England. And so basically England, that was basically, if you want to call it it was a replacement. It was another blood infusion of a new kind of people. I don't know if you'd want to call it genocide, but they did kill a bunch of people and they did have a lot of babies. So it was kind of a new infusion of Scandinavian blood and mainly Scandinavian language into England. A lot less of the Gaelic, although they speak Gaelic all the way up until today, and Latin, and it was more Frisian. There's this part of, I think, in Holland. The Dutch dialect they speak in Holland is the most similar to how the English spoke in Old English in the time of the Viking Age. So they took over that, but the Vikings, they were doing raids all over Europe because they could ride their little boats. Even though they could take those same kinds of boats across the ocean, they could ride those little boats up all the rivers. And so the Vikings basically took over Russia. I don't know who lived in Russia before that, but they went in there, and the Vikings took over Russia. They probably by killing people, doing the Viking thing, hacking people apart, and they were vicious. They would kill everybody. And now one guy, the guy who started York, he said that he was a king in Denmark. But he got deposed by his people for being too bad of a king, being an oppressive king. So whether that's what the case was or they just got kicked out, they're probably pissed about getting kicked out, and they were like, all right, well, we just got emasculated by our own people in our land, and it ain't gonna happen again. We're gonna kick some ass. Maybe that's why they're so violent. They didn't take prisoners. They just killed people. And they didn't just kill men; they killed everybody. There was one Viking called Helgar the child saver, because he was the only Viking who wouldn't kill children. But they had like Jimmy Johnson, not Jimmy Johnson, Othar the skull splitter, because he liked to split people's skulls in half. Ooh, look, I got another one. See how that one popped? They're crazy. And one of their leaders was this giant guy who didn't have any bones. They called him like Jimmy, Galmfar, the boneless, and he had to be carried on a shield. That's how they carried their kings back then, around on shields. But he didn't have any bones. They took over a large part of England, and they took over Russia. And one thing about Russia is like, why is Russia so fucked up? Vikings, dude. It's because of the Vikings. Not mainly. It's mainly because of the Mongols. But it's a combination of the Vikings and the Mongols. Russia is a place that's just always getting invaded by primitive people from the steppe. I mean, there's nothing that protects Russia. It's this huge advanced expanse of grassland filled with people on horseback who are total savages, who all they care about is killing. But we'll go back